this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw a rose with pastels. Now, of course, you're welcome to use any medium that you wish, of course, any pastel brand that you wish as well. For this demonstration, I'll be using Rembrandt stick pastels. We'll also be using Conte a Paris pastel pencils, which are really nice and soft, and also Carb Othello pastel pencils, which are really great for getting those precise details. For this demonstration, we'll be working on pastel matte paper. Now, I've started here with a basic contour line drawing of a rose. You can use a graphite transfer if you prefer. We're going to go ahead and address the background first, since most of the applications made for the rose are going to overlap the background, so it makes sense to start with the background. We'll start with an application of black. Now, black on its own is very, very strong, and it can tend to make a colored drawing look flat and unnatural. So we won't leave the black there on its own. Instead, we'll add a bit of a darker red, and we'll use our fingers to blend these applications in as we go. You'll also notice that I've already taped off the edges of the picture plane. This will create a nice sharp edge around the drawing when we're finished. Once we've applied the darker red to the background and blended the applications with our finger, we'll go back with another application of the black over the top. Now, this may seem like a pointless activity, but it's not. There's still a little bit of that red showing through, so it makes the black appear more natural while keeping the value nice and dark, so we have really strong contrast in our final image. Now we'll start addressing some of the petals of the rose, and we'll start with the petal that's farthest away from the viewer, and then we'll gradually work our way forward. The reason for doing this is we want to think about the petals as they overlap, and we want to start with the petals that are further away so that we can address the petals that overlap those petals, so we're not working around each one of the sections. This will lead to cleaner and crisper edges. Now, as we're applying these applications, you can see here we started with a medium red, and then we went slightly darker, and now we're going slightly darker still. Once we've got those base applications in place, we're simply going to start working the values, and value is the darkness or lightness of a color. So we're going to be pushing the lighter and darker versions of red. We're also going to be using some cooler and warmer versions of red as well. You can see some of those cooler applications were laid down first, and then the warmer applications. We can adjust the values even further and increase the contrast by adding a bit of black, as we just saw with the pastel pencil, and then I'm using a blending stump here to smooth the applications. So basically what we're going to do with each one of the petals is we're going to start with a base color, and we'll make sure that that's consistent for each one of the petals, and then from that base color we'll work the values outward, both lighter and darker, adjusting the values and increasing the contrast as we go. We're going to use the same set of colors for each one of the petals to make sure that our drawing is consistent. You can see here now we're adding a bit of light red, which is pink, and then we can continue to go back with the black. Now, we're not using the black here alone either. We've got that base color underneath. So although that black may appear like it's pure black, some of that red is showing underneath, which makes a more natural looking color. With our first petal in place, we'll simply move on to the next set of petals that overlap it. You can see here that we started with our base application of the same red that we used for our first petal. Then we'll just establish some of the darker values with a bit of black and a bit of the cooler red. Then we can use a blending stump to ease transitions and work this application into the tooth of the paper. As we go, we can go back to the other petals that we've already addressed and make adjustments if necessary. As you can see here, we went back and added a little bit of light peach on the side of the petal that is closest to one of the light sources, but more on the light source in just a moment. We'll continue to add a bit of a lighter red, which is pink again, and then continue to blend these applications with the blending stump. We'll continue to increase the contrast here with a bit more black. Now, the light source, of course, is important in any drawing that you create. And in this case, we have actually two light sources. We have a dominant light source, which is originating from the upper right-hand portion of the picture plane. And then we have a less dominant light source, which is coming from the left side. Now, we'll continue to work down to our next set of petals, and you'll see a trend developing here. Again, we're going to start with our base application of the red, and then start establishing some of the darker values with a bit of black. Now you'll also notice that I'm working for the most part from the left side of the picture plane to the right, and this is simply because I'm right-handed and I don't want to smear any of the pastel applications in place. To help me prevent smearing even further, I'm using the cover sheet, which is provided with the pastel matte paper, to act as a barrier in between the palm of my hand and the surface of the paper. So you can see here with this set of petals that we're addressing now, we started with the base color, we added the black, we added some of the cooler reds, and then some of the warmer reds, and now we're addressing some of the highlights with light peach and a few applications of pink. Then we can smooth these applications with the blending stop. So by adjusting the values for each one of the petals, we're essentially creating the illusion of form. We're also creating a hint of texture as well through the directional strokes that we make. So we need to think about the form of each one of the petals as we're working through this process, and think about where the light is hitting, where the shadowed locations are, because ultimately that's what leads to the illusion of form. So we're basically addressing each one of these petals as its own form. You can see here we added a strong highlight on the left side of the petal using a light orange, and now we're just making some of those darker values a little bit darker with an additional application of the black pastel pencil. We can go back now with our warmer red and warm up the petal here. You'll notice as you're working through any color drawing or painting that you'll need to make adjustments to make sure that the entire drawing is consistent and unified. That's why it's so important to use the same colors throughout a piece in many circumstances, or at least if you have one color in one location, be sure to add it somewhere else in another location in the piece so that you have some consistency and a feeling of unity. Now, before we address additional petals on the rose, we'll go ahead and address the stem and some of the leaves underneath. We'll start with a light yellow-green pastel pencil, and then just as we did with the petals, we'll go with a little bit of black to make the values a little bit darker, a little bit of a darker green over the top to smooth out those black applications so they're not quite as strong, and then we'll add a earthy yellow to add a little bit more of a natural feeling to these petals. And then just as we've done before, we'll address the values and make sure that we have a good contrast in this location and also the feeling of a natural shadow underneath. So hopefully you're noticing that this process is pretty straightforward. We're basically just starting with the base color, even with the leaves, and then we're just addressing the values and adding related colors over the top to create the illusion of form. It's not rocket science or anything like that. It's just a patient process, and it involves, just like I said, a little bit of patience. Now we'll work our way down to the stem of the rose, and again we'll start with our base application of yellow-green. Now in this case, the stem of the rose actually has a little bit more of a cooler color associated with it. So we're going to use a little bit of a blue-green in this location, and then we'll use a brighter and lighter yellow-green for the highlights. We'll add a few indications of a few thorns before moving on to the second leaf. Again, we'll start with the same base color here, a light yellow-green, and then we'll address the values with the black. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that the directional stroking plays an important role in developing the illusion of form and also the texture. So you'll notice that as the leaf comes down and curves off to the right, the majority of the strokes that I'm making are mimicking this. They're coming down and to the right. So instead of making horizontal strokes in this section, I'm thinking about the form of each one of the petals, the leaves, the stem, and so on, each one of the individual parts. So the directional strokes that we make in each section will change according to the form and texture of each one of those sections. So you can see here now that we've built up a little bit of contrast there, we've got a little bit of shadow. I'm going back to the petal that we just addressed and making some of the shadows a little bit darker so that it's consistent. So we'll simply continue on working each section as we come to it. At this point, we've kind of come up with a method for each one of the petals. We're starting with our base application. We're addressing the darker values with the black, adding some of those warm and cool reds, and then blending with the blending stop, and then we're adjusting the values even further to increase the contrast and create a more full range of value. You can see here now on this particular petal, we have a stronger indication of the light source originating from the right side. So we'll address that with a lighter orange, almost a peach color for those highlights. Now we'll continue with our process here, again addressing the next petal with our base application of red, and then starting to develop some of the darker values with the black pastel pencil and some of those details, and of course some of the texture as well. Now we're all going to approach artworks differently, and this of course is just one way that we're approaching this particular subject. Some folks are going to prefer basically creating an entire base application for the entire shape of the rose, and then go back and adjust the values and add colors sporadically throughout the piece all at the same time. And in many circumstances, I might address a subject in that way using pastels, but in this particular case, I really felt like each one of the petals could be addressed individually using a process, and that's what we're seeing here. So don't feel like the process that you're seeing here, the technique that you're seeing here, is the only way to create a drawing like this. It's definitely not. And that's one of the wonderful things about creating art, is there's multiple ways to be right. And if there's anybody that tells you that that's not the case, well, I wouldn't listen to them, because over the years, I've definitely run into many students and many other artists who have their own process of approaching subjects, and you can find equal success using a variety of different processes and approaches. So now we're going to do a little bit of backtracking here. Although we're trying to address each one of the petals that overlap the previous applications, in this case, it's probably a little bit better to go back and go ahead and address some of the petals on the left side, again, since I am right-handed, and we're also working from the left to the right. But again, the process stays the same. We start with our base application and then apply those warm and cool reds, and then adjust the values by adding the shadows and the highlights. It's a straightforward process, of course, and then once you've got your technique down, once you've got your process down, I should say, then each one of the petals becomes a little bit more easy to address, and it becomes a process that you can repeat, a repeatable process for this particular subject. Now, you may have noticed that I'm not really calling out the colors that I'm using. I'm addressing, we're using a dark red, a cool red, a warm red, and so on. But I'm purposely leaving out the names of the colors that we're using. Now, you may be wondering why that's the case. And that's because simply I don't really think about the name of the color when I'm creating a piece of artwork. I'm choosing colors based on what I observe in the reference or observe in life. And I feel like it's important for students to do the same thing. For example, if we wanted to make this rose a blue rose for whatever reason, we could if we wanted to. Really, the most important aspect of creating a color drawing or painting is in the values. You can create a believable image as long as the values are correct. And of course, value is the darkness or lightness of a color. So the colors that you choose may be different, and that's important to choose different colors sometimes. We shouldn't approach an image like this or a tutorial or a lesson like this with an attitude of copying it. Instead, we should look at a lesson like this and learn from the lesson so that we can apply it to our own artworks that we create. And if we're simply just copying colors or grabbing the exact colors that the teaching artist is using, then we're not really learning to make our own decisions regarding color and value and so on. So now we're working towards the center of the rose here, and again, the process stays the same. It's a repetitive process, but it's important to repeat the same process. We're starting with the base color and then adjusting those values. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that we're working on a surface called pastel matte paper. Now, this paper provides ample tooth or texture to accept multiple applications of the pastels. And of course, this is important to find a surface that will accept multiple layered applications of the pastel. We can see in this demonstration how important that is to create a full range of value and create some depth and complexity in the colors that we apply. But this paper is also relatively smooth compared to other pastel surfaces, which is really nice. If you're looking to create smoother textures in a drawing, like we are here with the rose petals, which of course rose petals are velvety, they have a softer feel, but they also have a smoother appearance to them, then a paper like this is going to be suitable. If you're using a different type of paper, like for example, Canson Mitant's pastel paper, which is another favorite surface of mine, that paper paper has a heavier tooth or texture associated with it. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to create those smooth transitions of value and color with that particular paper. You can still get those smooth transitions of color and value, but it may be a little bit more difficult to control your applications. So each surface that you choose should correlate with the subject matter that you're working with. So here we're working on the rose petal that's closest to the light source. You can see as it dips down back into the body of the rose, we have the darker values, but as it gets closer to the light source, the values are lighter. So we're getting close to the end at this point, and our process stays the same. We start with that base application of red and then begin adjusting the values. You'll notice as we have gotten closer to our dominant light source on the right side of the picture plane, we're using less and less of those cool reds. Most of the cooler reds exist on the left side of the rose, which is closer to our secondary light source, but we also have a higher concentration of shadows on that side as well. Now for the center portion of the rose, again, we'll start with our base application. And there's just a few darker values here. These darker values are relatively strong, though, because they are in the center portion of the rose. And just like we have strong shadows, we also have a couple of strong highlights there. So we'll address that with a very light orange. And then our overlapping portion of this petal, where it kind of comes up and flips back over itself, has some darker values on the left side and then some lighter values on the right side, closer to the dominant light source. Now, of course, when we work with the pastel drawing, there's pastel dust and things that fly around during the process, and that can contaminate different parts of the drawing. So now that we're at the end, we can clean things up. I'm just going to use my finger here to work in some of that colored dust into the background, and then I'll go back around some of the edges of the rose and create a strong edge using the black pastel pencil. And now we can pull the tape off of the surface to reveal those nice, sharp, crisp lines. And now our drawing of a rose using pastels is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then I know you'll love being a member at thevirtualinstructor.com. Our members have access to all of our drawing and painting courses on a variety of subjects and techniques. Each one of our video modules includes a downloadable illustrated ebook that goes along with the video. We also have weekly live lessons. All of these lessons are streamed for an hour each week on a variety of subjects and mediums, and they're recorded and stored in our library, our vault of recorded live lessons from the past. So the program just continues to grow week by week. There's also the weekly critiques, which are part of the Members Minute, where you can learn by analyzing the artworks of others. There's a year-long lesson plan for visual arts teachers that includes lesson plans, video resources, handouts, and much, much more. There's just so much involved in our unique membership program. So if you're interested in learning how to take your drawings and paintings to another level, I suggest you check out the program. Everybody starts with a trial, so you can go in and check everything out risk-free. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I wish you all the best in your artistic success.